They hadn't spoken to me in 4 years, not a real conversation, not since the argument at my 60th birthday dinner. Yet here they were, all four of them, standing on my porch in the pouring rain, looking like a jury sent to deliver a sentence. I was wiping flour from my hands, the familiar, comforting smell of baking bread filling the kitchen, when I saw the headlights cut through the gray afternoon. One car, then another. I watched, my apron stained with cinnamon and dough, as my children emerged, hunched against the weather, and walked up the path to the house I'd built with their father. My eldest, Jonathan, led the way, umbrella held aloft, his lawyer's posture already setting my teeth on edge. Behind him, my daughter, Victoria, was a silhouette of sharp angles and a designer trench coat. Then came the twins, Benjamin and Serena, huddled together under a single golf umbrella, their steps hesitant. 47, 45, 43, and 43. My whole world standing on the other side of the glass storm door. And I knew, in the pit of my stomach, the way a mother knows a child's fake cry from a real one, that this was not a reunion. This was a transaction. Jonathan didn't knock. He opened the door as if he still lived here, as if his key hadn't been taken back a decade ago. "Mom," he said, stepping into the foyer, dripping on the braided rug I'd made the winter their father was sick. "We need to talk." If you've ever felt your heart turn to stone in your own chest, if you've ever looked at the faces you loved most and seen strangers, then you understand. This channel is for stories like that, for our side. If my story speaks to you, subscribe. Stay with me. There are more truths to be told. I didn't move from the doorway to the kitchen. The house is still standing. I'm still breathing. What could be so urgent it couldn't be said on the phone? Victoria offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. We came all this way. Can we at least sit down?" She brushed past me, the scent of her expensive perfume clashing violently with the homely scent of bread. The others followed, a solemn procession into the living room. The room where they'd opened Christmas presents, where we'd held Shiva for their father, where I now spent my evenings with a book and the quiet. They arranged themselves on the furniture, Jonathan in the wing-back chair, Victoria on the edge of the sofa, the twins sharing the love seat. They left the large armchair by the fireplace for me, my chair. I remained standing. "Well?" Benjamin, always the peacemaker, spoke first. "We're worried about you, Mom. This place, it's a lot. The upkeep, the stairs, you're not getting any younger." "I'm 64. I ran a 5K last month with the garden club." "A fall risk increases exponentially after 65, Jonathan stated, as if reading from a legal brief. "This house has 2 flights of stairs, uneven floorboards on the second story, and that porch is rotting. It's a liability." "My porch is fine. Hank from next door helped me replace the weak boards last spring." Serena, her voice soft as always, chimed in. "But Hank is 80, Mom. What if he's not around to help? We all live so far away. Jonathan's in Chicago, I'm in Boston, Vicky's in D.C., Ben's in Seattle. We can't just pop over." "You haven't popped over in 4 years," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The distance hasn't been a problem until now. Why is it a problem now?" Victoria sighed, the long, suffering sigh I remembered from her teenage years. "We're trying to have an adult conversation about your future security, and you're being defensive. Typical. Look." She reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a sleek tablet. With a few taps, she turned it around to face me. It showed a glossy brochure for Silver Pines Assisted Living Community. I stared at the picture of smiling, silver-haired people playing cards in a sun-drenched lounge. "I am not assisted. I am living." "It's independent living," Jonathan corrected. "But the point is, this property," he gestured around the room, "is an asset that is not being leveraged efficiently. The market in this town has peaked. According to my analysis, if we sell now, we could net around $750,000. A place at Silver Pines or similar would run you $300,000 for a buy-in, plus monthly fees. That leaves a substantial remainder." The word remainder hung in the air, fat and ugly. "We?" I asked quietly. "The family. Benjamin said, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. What would the family do with this substantial remainder? Jonathan leaned forward, elbows on knees. We've all got pressures, Mom. My firm is expanding, and the capital required is significant. Victoria's husband, Robert, was laid off 6 months ago. The twins, well, Serena's fertility treatments aren't covered by insurance, and Ben's, let's just say the pandemic recovery has been slow. This isn't just about you, it's about the family's stability as a whole. We could set up a trust from the proceeds, you'd be taken care of, and we'd have a safety net. I looked at each of them. Jonathan in his $2,000 suit, talking about capital. Victoria with her diamond wedding band that could probably feed a family for a year, talking about her husband's unemployment. Benjamin, who sunk $50,000 of my money into his farm-to-table concept 5 years ago and never accounted for it. Serena, whose heartbreaking desire for a child I understood, but who had never once asked me how I felt about being a grandmother, only how I could finance it. The pieces snapped together with a chilling clarity. This was a coordinated takeover. They hadn't come to see me, they'd come to assess the property. You want me to sell my home, the words flat, final. The home your father and I bought with every penny we saved, the home we raised you in, the home where he took his last breath? You want me to sell it, put me in a retirement home, and split what's left? It's the pragmatic solution, Jonathan said. It's a betrayal. The force of my own voice surprised me, surprised them. I saw Victoria flinch. You talk about my safety, my future. Where were you when I had COVID and couldn't get out of bed for a week? The neighbor's college kid brought me groceries. Where were you when the pipe burst in the basement last winter? I paid a plumber $800. Where were you on Mother's Day, on my birthday? I got a text from Benjamin, a generic floral arrangement from Jonathan's secretary, and nothing from the two of you. I pointed at Victoria and Serena. We're busy, Victoria shot back, her composure cracking. We have lives, Mom, real, complicated lives. You sit here in this museum, baking bread and pretending everything's fine, but the world moves on. You have a resource that could actually help your children, and you're clinging to it out of sentimentality. It's selfish. The word. A bullet. Selfish. I had worked part-time as a librarian for 30 years so I could be home when they got off the school bus. I had driven to 1,000 soccer games, play rehearsals, debate tournaments. I had sat up with them through heartbreaks and exams. I had forgone a promotion, vacations, new clothes, so Jonathan could go to law school, so Victoria could study abroad, so the twins could have the same opportunities. I had given them the down payment for Jonathan's first condo. I had co-signed Victoria's car lease. I had never, ever said no when they needed me. And now I was selfish. Get out, I whispered. Mom, please, Serena began, tears in her eyes. No, you do not get to walk into my house after years of silence and tell me to sell it for your convenience. You do not get to call me selfish. Get out, now. Jonathan stood, his face a mask of cold anger. You're being irrational. This is a mistake you'll regret. The only mistake I regret is raising vultures. Out. They left, a stunned, shuffling retreat. Victoria snatched her tablet back. Benjamin mumbled an apology. Serena was crying openly. Jonathan's back was rigid with fury. I closed the door behind them, turned the deadbolt with a definitive click, and slid down against the wood until I was sitting on the floor, the smell of rain and ambition still lingering in the air. The bread burned. I didn't care. I sat there as the sky darkened, as the smell of charred dough joined the scent of rain. My whole body was numb. It wasn't just the ask, it was the entitlement, the sheer, breathtaking entitlement. They saw me not as a person, but as a custodial manager of an asset that was, in their minds, rightfully partly theirs. My love, my life, my memories, all just sentimental clutter obstructing their access to cash. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced. I wandered through the rooms of the too big, too quiet house. I stopped in front of the built-in bookshelves in the den, my fingers tracing the spines of old photo albums. I pulled one down, from the early 2000s. There we were at Lake George. Jonathan, a teenager, scowling at the camera. Victoria, preening in a new bikini. The twins, little bundles of energy, building a sandcastle. My husband, Mark, his arm around me, smiling. We looked happy. We were happy. When did it fracture? Was it when Mark died 8 years ago of the cancer that ate him alive in 16 brutal months? They'd all been there at the end, but after the funeral, the calls dwindled. The visits stopped. They had their own grief, I told myself, their own lives. I was the anchor left behind in the empty harbor. By 3 a.m., the shock had burned away, leaving a clear, cold resolve. They thought I was an old woman, sentimental, irrational, easily managed. They thought they could ambush me with a PowerPoint presentation of my own obsolescence. They were wrong. The first thing I did, even before the sun was fully up, was call my goddaughter, Maya. She was 28, the daughter of my oldest friend, Clara, who had passed 2 years prior. Maya was a paralegal at a fierce family law firm in the city. She was also the only young person who checked in on me, who sent me funny memes, who came for a weekend every few months, and helped me prune the rose bushes without once mentioning real estate values. "Aunt Helen," she answered, voice groggy with sleep. "Everything okay?" "No, Maya, it's not." I told her everything, my voice shaking only slightly. The visit, the brochures, the $750,000, the accusations of selfishness. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. The gall, the absolute gall. "Okay, don't panic. They've shown their hand. This is good." "How is this good?" "Because now you know and you can act. First, do you have any recent proof of their financial suggestions?" "They didn't leave anything, just the talking points." "Did you record it?" "I hadn't. The thought hadn't occurred to me." "No." "It's fine. Start writing it all down now. Every word you can remember. Dates, times, exact quotes. Second, we need to get your affairs locked down tighter than Fort Knox. You have a will?" "From after Mark died, it leaves everything equally to the 4 of them." "We're changing that, today. I'm going to give you the number from my boss, Evelyn Sharp. She's a shark, but she's our shark. Tell her I sent you. She'll help you set up an irrevocable trust, new wills, powers of attorney, the whole 9 yards. You need to make it legally impossible for them to claim you're incompetent or under duress." They mentioned a fall risk, my age. Of course they did. Get a letter from your doctor stating you're in sound mental and physical health. Get a notarized statement from a friend or 2 about your independence. Build a paper trail that proves you're sharper than all of them put together, because, Aunt Helen, you are. Her certainty was a lifeline. What about the house? "The house is yours, in your name only?" "Yes, Mark and I owned it jointly. When he died, it passed to me outright." "Good. It stays that way. They have zero claim to it while you're alive. They're banking on guilt and pressure to make you hand it over. Don't." After I hung up with Maya, I felt the first flicker of something other than devastation. It was anger, clean and hot, and beneath that, a plan. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. I began to write, not just about yesterday, but about the last 8 years. Every loan, every gift, every time I'd been the emergency backstop. Jonathan's bridge loan for his firm's new offices, $35,000 in 2019. Victoria's request to pay for her daughter's private preschool tuition for a year, just until Robert's bonus comes through, which it never did. $18,000. Benjamin's restaurant infusion. Serena's first 2 rounds of IVF, which I'd contributed $12,000 to, because she'd cried on the phone about wanting to make me a grandmother. I'd wanted to be a grandmother too, but not as a line item on an invoice. I went to my filing cabinet, a chaotic monument to a lifetime of paperwork. I dug through folders marked taxes, medical, home. In the back, I found an old accordion file labeled Kids. Inside were canceled checks, bank transfer receipts, printed emails with subject lines like loan details and can you help? I spread them out on the dining room table. The total, meticulously added up on my calculator, took my breath away. $147,650. Nearly $150,000. Given freely, from my savings, from the life insurance money I'd gotten after Mark's death, money that was supposed to be my security blanket. And not one of them had ever paid a dime back. Not one had even offered. The proof was in my hands, concrete, undeniable. Check 2047, dated 10/15/2019, payable to Jonathan P. Ellis for $35,000. Memo line, business loan. I had written it the week after my own roof needed replacing. This was my minor revenge, my turn. I wouldn't confront them with it yet, but I knew it was there. I had the numbers. And knowledge, as they say, is power. I called Evelyn Sharp that afternoon. Her voice was like gravel and velvet. Maya told me to expect your call. Sounds like you've got some parasites trying to declare eminent domain on your life. That's one way to put it. The best way. Come see me tomorrow. Bring everything. The next day, in Evelyn's downtown office, surrounded by degrees and formidable artwork, I laid out my story and my documents. She scanned the checks, her eyes narrowing. They've been treating you like a human ATM, and now they want the machine itself. Classic. She outlined a plan. A revocable living trust would be created, with me as the trustee and Maya as the successor trustee. The house, my investments, everything would be transferred into the trust. Upon my death, the trust assets would pass to beneficiaries of my choosing, not through a will, which is easier to challenge, but through the trust's instructions. "Who do you want it to go to, Helen?" Evelyn asked, her pen poised. I didn't hesitate. Maya, and a portion to create a scholarship at the local library in Mark's name. The rest to be divided among my grandchildren's education funds, but administered by a third party, not their parents. And your children? I looked at the check for $35,000 on the table between us. They've already received their inheritance, in advance. Evelyn almost smiled. Good. We'll also draft durable powers of attorney for healthcare and finances, naming Maya. We'll include a clause that explicitly excludes your children from acting in those capacities, or from contesting the trust, on penalty of forfeiting any potential future inheritance from other holdings you might acquire. She saw my look. It's a deterrent, makes it legally and financially stupid for them to try and fight it. Will it work? It will make their head spin. They'll try emotional warfare first. Guilt, anger, tears. Then they might try legal threats. But with the documentation you have of their financial demands, coupled with these airtight documents and a letter from your doctor, their chances of overturning anything are near zero. They'd spend a fortune in legal fees for nothing. And I doubt their unity will hold once money is officially off the table. It took a week to get everything in order. I got a glowing letter from my GP, Dr. Evans, who wrote that I was cognitively sharp, physically active for my age, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. My friend from the garden club, Betty, wrote a notarized statement about my involvement in the community and my sound judgment. The storm hit exactly 1 week after their initial visit. It was Jonathan, of course, a phone call. "Mom, we need to talk about your impulsive behavior." His voice was tight, controlled. "What behavior is that?" "I know you've been to see a lawyer, Evelyn Sharp. I have colleagues who know her reputation. She's a pit bull. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I need a pit bull to protect me from the wolves." He ignored that. You cannot seriously be considering cutting your own children out of your estate over one difficult conversation. It's vindictive, it's irrational. It's prudent, I parroted one of Evelyn's words. Given the pressure I've been under to divest myself of my primary asset for your benefit, it's the only prudent course of action. There was a long silence. I could imagine his mind racing, recalculating. Who's poisoning you against us? Is it Maya? That gold-digging? Stop. My voice cut through the line, cold. You will not speak about her that way. Maya has shown me more kindness and respect in the past year than the four of you have in the past decade. This is my decision, mine alone, and it's final. You'll die alone in that house, he hissed, the mask of pragmatism finally slipping. And we won't be there to find you. Is that what you want? The cruelty of it took my breath away, but it also crystallized everything. This was the core of their threat, wasn't it? The ultimate weapon adult children hold over an aging parent, the threat of abandonment. They were saying, comply or face the ultimate loneliness. What I want, I said slowly, each word a stone laid on a path away from him, is to live in my home with peace and autonomy. If that means living alone, then so be it. I'd rather be alone than with people who see me as a line item. He hung up. Victoria's approach was different. She arrived 2 days later bearing a beautifully wrapped basket of fancy teas and a contrite expression. "Can we try again, please?" she asked from the porch.
I let her in. She sat in the living room, her eyes scanning the room as if taking inventory. "Mom, I'm sorry about how we came at you. It was clumsy. Jonathan can be such a bulldozer. We were worried and we handled it badly." "Why were you worried, Victoria? Truly?" She looked down at her hands. "We're struggling. Robert, he's depressed. He hasn't even been looking for work. The bills are piling up, the credit cards. When Jonathan suggested this, it seemed like a way out for everyone, a way to help you and help us. I see now it felt like an attack. It wasn't meant to be." It was a better performance than Jonathan's. There was a shard of truth in it, I could tell, but it was still a performance. The core ask was the same. Your money for our comfort. "I'm sorry about Robert," I said, and I meant it. That's very hard. But selling my house isn't the solution to that problem. "What is then?" she asked, a flash of genuine desperation in her eyes. "We need help, Mom." "I've given you help, for years. I have the checks to prove it. Over $30,000 to you, Victoria. When does it end? When the house is gone? And then what? There's nothing left, not for me, and eventually not for you either. This has to stop." Her face hardened. "So that's it? You're just cutting us off? Your own daughter?" "I'm not cutting you off from me. I'm cutting off the money. There's a difference. You are welcome here, any time, to visit me, not to assess the property value." She stood, the contrition gone. "You know, you and Dad always taught us family sticks together, helps each other. I guess that was only true when you were the one in charge of the help." She left, taking her tea basket with her. Benjamin called next, his voice heavy with regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I got swept up in it. Jonathan made it sound so logical. But seeing how hurt you were, Serena and we've been talking. We don't want the money. We miss you. This whole thing has been so ugly." This one hurt differently. Benjamin had always been my gentle soul. "I miss you too, Ben, but missing me didn't bring you here for 4 years. Jonathan's spreadsheet did." He was quiet. "I know. I don't have an excuse. I'm ashamed. Serena is too. She's a mess over this. She never wanted to hurt you. She wants a baby so badly it clouds everything." "I understand wanting," I said, "but you don't get to take from someone else to fill that want. Not even from your mother." "Will we ever be able to come home?" he asked, his voice small.
The door is open, but the bank is closed. The twins were the only ones who seemed genuinely grapple with the moral injury. Serena sent a long, rambling email a few days later, full of apologies and self-recrimination. She ended it with, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day I can earn back the right to be your daughter, not just another person who took from you." I didn't reply immediately. I needed time. Their words were better, but words were easy. I needed to see a change in actions, a consistency over time that wasn't tied to an immediate financial goal. In the meantime, I lived. I had the porch properly repaired, hiring a local contractor and paying him fairly. I joined a memoir writing class at the community center. I planted a new vegetable garden with tomatoes and zucchini and peppers. I had Maya over for dinner every other week, and we talked about her life, her dreams, her frustrations. It was a reciprocal relationship. I gave her advice, she helped me understand the world. I listened, she listened back. The climax came about 3 months after the initial visit. I received a formal-looking letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, Hartman and Pierce, LLC. My heart stuttered. Had they actually done it? Had they filed a challenge? With trembling hands, I opened it. It was not a lawsuit. It was a formal request for mediation and financial disclosure. It stated that Jonathan, Victoria, Benjamin, and Serena Ellis, concerned about the undue influence exerted upon their mother, Helen Ellis, and the sudden and radical changes to her estate plan, were requesting a family mediation session with a neutral third party to discuss equitable solutions and to review my financial records to ensure no elder financial abuse is taking place. They were accusing Maya. They were accusing me of being abused. The rage was white-hot and blinding. This was their legal threat, not to contest the trust yet, but to force me into a room, to demand my private financials, to paint Maya as a predator and me as a doddering victim. It was a bullying tactic, meant to intimidate me into backing down. I called Evelyn, incandescent with fury. "Calm down, Helen," she said, but I could hear the edge in her own voice. "This is a fishing expedition, a scare tactic. They have no grounds to demand your financial records. But they're saying I'm being abused. They can say whatever they want. Proving it is another matter. We will not be attending any mediation. We will not be providing any records to them. I will send a one-line response on my firm's letterhead. Our client declines your invitation and considers this matter closed. Then we go on the offensive." "Offensive?" I stumbled. "On what grounds?" "Harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Their coordinated campaign to pressure you into selling your home, followed by this legal threat based on fabricated concerns, constitutes a pattern of harassment designed to cause you severe emotional duress in order to gain financial benefit. We have the records of their financial demands, your doctor's letter, your statements. We ask the court to order them to cease and desist all contact regarding your finances and property and to stay a certain distance from you and your home." The thought of taking my children to court was anathema. It felt like a nuclear option. But what was the alternative? Rolling over? Letting them continue to try and bully me into submission?
"Do it," I heard myself say. The process was swift. Evelyn was a force of nature. The temporary restraining order was granted within days. The hearing for a permanent order was set for a month later. The fallout was instantaneous and explosive. Jonathan called, leaving a sputtering, furious voicemail about betrayal and lawsuits. Victoria sent a text. "A restraining order? You are a sick, vindictive woman." Benjamin and Serena were silent, perhaps finally understanding the chasm they had helped dig. The hearing was the final battlefield. We met in a sterile courtroom.
My 4 children sat on one side with a young, nervous-looking attorney they'd hired. I sat with Evelyn and Maya. I did not look at them. Their attorney argued that this was a family misunderstanding, that their concerns were born of love, that my isolation and the involvement of a non-family member in my affairs justified their actions. Evelyn stood. She was magnificent. She presented the timeline, the 4-year absence, the ambush visit with the assisted living brochures, the recorded financial demands. I had, after the first visit, begun recording our calls, as per Evelyn's advice, legal in my state. She played a clip of Jonathan saying, "You'll die alone in that house." She presented the mediation letter. She presented my doctor's statement, Betty's statement, the list of $147,650 in loans. "This is not love," Evelyn said to the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s. "This is a cold, calculated attempt at financial exploitation. Their concern only manifested when their requests for money were denied and their access to a major asset was blocked. They have harassed and threatened my client, a capable, independent woman, to the point where she fears for her peace and security in her own home. The request for a permanent order is not to punish, but to protect." The judge listened, her expression unreadable. She asked Jonathan a few pointed questions about his analysis of the property value. She asked Victoria if she had visited her mother in the year prior to the initial meeting. The answers were damning in their evasion. In the end, the judge granted the permanent restraining order. It prohibited my children from contacting me regarding my finances, property, or estate plan. It prohibited them from coming within 500 feet of my home. It allowed for contact only through a designated third party, Maya, for genuine, non-financial family emergencies. "Family," the judge said dryly as she closed the file, "is supposed to be a sanctuary, not a source of terror. I suggest you all remember that." It was over. I had won, and it felt like the most profound loss of my life. The epilogue unfolded slowly, in the quiet rhythms I had reclaimed. The house was truly, deeply mine now, protected by the force of law and my own iron will. The silence, which had once felt like loneliness, now felt like peace. It was a choice. Benjamin and Serena began, tentatively, to write. Not emails about money or guilt, but letters. Actual letters on paper. Benjamin wrote about his restaurant, about a new chef he'd hired, about his dog. Serena wrote about her garden, about a book she was reading. They asked about mine. They never asked for anything. After 6 months of consistent, pressure-free correspondence, I allowed Maya to give them my email address. The conversations are still stilted, careful. The trust is a fragile seedling. It may never grow into what it was, but it's something other than a wasteland. Victoria and Jonathan have honored the restraining order. I hear snippets through the grapevine, from Betty, whose niece knows Jonathan's wife. His firm did expand somehow. Victoria's husband found a job. They managed without my house. They always could have. They just didn't want to. Maya is my rock. She is the daughter of my heart. She's talking about law school, and I've told her the trust will help with that. It feels right. It feels like an investment in a future that sees me as a person, not a portfolio. On my 65th birthday, I woke up early. I made coffee, took it out to the porch, my sturdy, repaired porch, and watched the sunrise over my garden. The roses were blooming, deep crimson and buttery yellow. The tomatoes were heavy on the vine. The only sound was the chirping of birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. I thought about the scared woman wiping flour on her apron 4 years ago, facing down her children like enemies. I am not that woman anymore. I am harder in some places, softer in others. I have learned that love does not require self-annihilation, that setting a boundary is not an act of violence, but an act of self-respect, that sometimes protecting your peace means excluding the very people you thought you couldn't live without. My story is not one of a bitter old woman who drove her children away. It is the story of a woman who finally stopped driving herself into the ground for people who would never look up from their maps to see she was lost. I reached back for myself, and I found I was still there. They will tell their own story, I know this. In theirs, I will be the villain, the cold, withholding mother who chose a house over her flesh and blood. But this is my side, and my truth is in the quiet mornings, in the thriving garden, in the peace that comes from knowing what is mine is truly mine, not because I hoard it, but because I chose it. Your sanctuary is not selfish, it is sacred. Guard it. If you heard your own life in my words, if you've ever been told you're too much for wanting to keep what's yours, leave a comment below. Tell your story. You are not alone in this. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, of women reclaiming their ground, subscribe to the channel. Stay with me. Our side is just beginning to be heard.